Welcome to the premiere of State Matters. I'm your host, Matt Muratore. It's been a few months since we've been on the air with our former show, Today in Plymouth, but we are back with our new look, new job, and a new show. As a selectman, I enjoyed doing the Today in Plymouth show, which educated people about the importance of local government and how it works and maybe sometimes doesn't work for you, the citizens of our community. As a new state rep, which, by the way, I was so honored and humbled to be elected, this show, State Matters, will aim to do the same as Today in Plymouth. We will attempt to educate you about how state government works or doesn't work on your behalf. To that end, we will have guests that will assist us in the understanding of the role of state government and how it interacts with our local government. I'm very happy to have as our first guest a gentleman who was first elected state representative in 1994. He represents the towns of Reading, North Reading, Lynnfield, and Middletown. He has never missed a roll call vote. He is committed to championing tax relief, accountability in government, fiscal restraint, and smarter spending. He is an advocate for tougher laws on crime, improved educational opportunities for Massachusetts children, better benefits for seniors and veterans, and more local aid for cities and towns. In 2002, he was elected by his colleagues as the House Republican leader, a role he still has to this day. Please join me in welcoming Leader Brad Jones. Brad,
Thanks,
welcome.
Matt.
Thanks for coming down here. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
So we always start our show with finding out who our guests are. So why don't you talk about who is Brad Jones?
You talk about you're doing the show originally as a member of the Board of Selectmen. Mm-hmm. I did 6 years of my Board of Selectmen, 3 years as chair, 2 years as vice chair. I did 4 years in my finance committee. I did 4 years in my housing authority. So I cut my teeth on sort of local government and local involvement.
Did you do finance committee first, then
I did finance committee. I actually did housing authority first.
Okay.
Then I went to the finance committee for a year.
Yep.
Then I went to the Board of Selectmen for 6. And then I went back to the finance committee.
Really?
So I was
Okay.
what you known as a glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
I was also state rep for the 6 years.
I was going to say, I saw that in your bio that you were actually state rep at the same time.
Yeah,
that you
and
were
I ran for
selectman?
re-election to selectman.
Really?
When I was a sitting state rep, which
Yeah.
was probably a little crazy.
Yeah.
But it was
Plymouth doesn't allow that.
Okay.
Plymouth did a law about 20 years ago that does not allow you to have both.
Okay, and we
So I had to step down.
they let us do that, and it was an interesting time, and I think it's great to be on the show because I think that really having that service as a local official really helped me in my position as state representative. And what you talked about in the opening was the things that we do at the State House has a real impact, and sometimes just as importantly, things we don't do has a real impact.
Right.
And some of them are maybe more obvious than others. But I think as we go through the show, maybe we can talk about a few that are maybe a little less obvious.
Yeah, sure. So, so you actually live in Reading, though, correct?
I live in North Reading.
North Reading, okay. And you're married, you have a couple of kids?
Yep, two kids, a
Yep.
boy and a girl, yep. And
Yep.
my wife, yep, and my wife works in Boston.
Yeah.
And
What you used to do for a job?
well, before this, I've been in office on. Before this, I was actually a legislative aide. I was a staffer, and my predecessor left, so we had a special election.
Yeah.
So I took the opportunity to run for that. So
Yeah.
I've been in and around government pretty much since I got out of college.
Yeah. What do you like about it?
Well, for me personally, I like that I represent where I grew up. And I like the fact that every day is a little different challenge, a little different issue. And every once in a while, I think I finally get to the point where I think I've seen everything, but then something else happens and you realize you haven't seen everything. So every day is kind of a new challenge and a new opportunity. And again, the idea of representing sort of where I grew up and being able to be involved in things, whether it's ball fields where I played Little League or played soccer and helping maybe expand those or continue those programs or enhance those programs for, either, my kids or future generations or other generations is a lot of fun.
One of the things I really enjoyed in your bio had to do with Thanksgiving time.
Yes.
Talk about that, what you do.
Thanksgiving. Well, back when I was in the Board of Selectmen, we had our Director of Elder Services always did an annual Thanksgiving dinner for all our seniors. And there was no charge. We raised the money and donations and this and that and put it on for all the seniors to come. Well, there came a point where, she got to a point where she was older and wanted to step aside, so she kind of passed it off to my wife and I. So we've done it for the better part of the past decade. And a few years back, the town of Reading approached us and said, geez, you do this wonderful Thanksgiving dinner in North Reading. So the weekend before Thanksgiving, on Saturday and Sunday, we host 2 Thanksgiving dinners, one on Saturday, one on Sunday, one for Reading, one for North Reading. We have about 600 to 800 seniors come in.
Really?
And they get a full meal and they have entertainment. The last several years, we've had Sergeant Dan Clark, the singing sergeant from the state police,
voice. Yeah.
entertain, sometimes with his wife, who was trained operatic singer, and they will perform. and we get donations and things like that and do that. And then I got so successful for a couple of years, the town of Linfield asked us to help out sponsoring one at their senior center. So we did that. So so by the time Thursday of Thanksgiving rolls around, I'm about turkeyed out.
Just have a steak dinner instead.
But that was the seniors love it. It's always kind of fun because we talk about please show up at 12:30, and we usually have the people that are pulling in the parking lot around 10 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. Sure.
But it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, as you know, my background is elder care. And I've been doing it since 1977. Been involved in nursing homes, assisted livings, et cetera. And so I have a passion for that. Actually, my first assignment in Plymouth was appointed to the Council on Aging.
Okay.
So I got appointed to the Council on Aging, then the Finance Committee, and then became selectman. Right. So I have a great passion for elders, and I'm proud that you do that.
And it is. It's really important. One of the things I enjoy about it is because it always sort of maybe on a more day-to-day basis, it's more focus on sort of around the schools and programming for youth, and realizing that what defines a community is sort of youth all the way up to how you treat the seniors, who in many instances were people that have been in town their entire life, who may have been involved in building the schools that the kids are going to. And I think that's sort of that nice cycle of, hey, we take care of people from all the way through.
Absolutely,
it's good.
In this town, in Plymouth, I think it was 2006, 2007. There was a major vote of the townspeople to build two new high schools. And a senior center.
Right.
And the reason the senior center was put in because they knew the seniors would come out and support the senior center and the schools.
It's a package deal.
And it became a package deal.
Right.
And to this day, we actually now have a new senior center. We have one brand new school and another new school that's breaking ground.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's
good.
The seniors are important to all our communities.
We just finished, we're just putting the ribbon cutting is next month on our new joint middle high school for about $120 million project.
Excellent.
So it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's excellent. Good. Before I get into any more questions, I do need to publicly thank you. And you may not even remember this, but you and I met. First time I met you was about a year ago.
In my office.
In your office,
Yep.
yeah. Vinny, Senator DiMacedo,
Yep.
the time was Rep DiMacedo, brought me in to meet you.
Yes.
And my wife, Krista, and I at the time were exploring the option of running. And you clinched it for me. And I'll tell you 2 reasons why.
Okay, I haven't heard this story before.
One,
so
you haven't.
Completely
I never told
unscripted.
this, but yeah. I had a rubber band around my wrist.
Okay.
And you remember the kids at the time, you had one as well.
Yep.
The kids were making these rubber bands.
Yes.
And so we kind of talked about that and our kids. But the biggest thing that you said to me that made it, that clinched it for me to run, had to do with when you said to me, you're always there for your community, no matter what. Because I think people have the impression when you go into government, state government, federal government, that there's always this infighting, and you have to go, get along, and vote the way people want. But when you said, you know what, always vote what's right for your district.
Right.
And when there's a conflict within the state house and your district, always be at your district.
Right.
You're there for the people.
Right.
And that said a lot to me. Talk about that, your philosophy on
Well,
that.
I mean, we had a caucus a couple weeks back talking about gubernatorial vetoes, and I said, look, my best advice to everybody here is vote your district.
Right.
Vote what you feel you need to do to best represent your district. Now, realizing there are times when there's a strong difference of opinion in your district.
Right.
And sometimes you have to sift through that. You can have 100 people contact you, and 51 of them want you to vote yes on something, and 49 want you to vote no on something, and ultimately you probably hope, I hope we don't have to vote because I'm going to have some people happy and some people unhappy. But there are some issues that, that are clear cut, that this is in the best interest of my district, this is where the preponderance of my constituents have been reaching out to me, and having that interaction all the time, because a lot of times you might not hear from your constituents, so it's hopefully knowing your district well enough that you can make the right decision because your district hasn't had time to even interact with you. And because we don't control the agenda on Beacon Hill. You and I don't control the calendar, what's going to come up, and have a chance to have a cable show or office hours or solicit input. So it's hopefully being active enough along the way and having a good enough read on the pulse of your district so that when an issue comes up and say, you know what, my people are going to be crazy about this, or they're going to, positively or negatively, and to be able to, be able to act on that. And I think, at the end of the day, I tell people, look, I'm a Republican state representative, but I'm a representative who happens to be Republican first and foremost. I was sent there on behalf of 42,000 people, the vast majority of which don't really care about partisan politics.
Right.
They want to know, and I think we have an obligation that when they reach out to state government, we want, and from a customer service standpoint, want them to have a positive interaction so that they can feel like the tax dollars that they're constantly being asked to shell out are being spent wisely and that they have a good experience.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I like that word, customer service, because that's how I feel that we are too. Right. We are the customer service representatives for the people we represent at the State House. So but I thank you for that. But you really helped with that. You served on a number of committees. You've been House Minority Leader for about 10 years now, I believe.
12, yeah.
12 years now, and before that, you were on a number of committees.
I was on Ways and Means. Some of the committees, actually, the names have changed. It used to be a committee called Commerce and Labor. That was one of the first ones I was on, and that talked about like economic development and business interests and this and that. When I first got elected, federal financial assistance, which just kind of morphed to Veterans Affairs and federal issues. And I served on a number of special commissions, redistricting, MBTA financing back in the late 90s. So now, I'm lucky I get to appoint people. And
yeah, I know.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. I wanted to talk to you about that last one. I saw that about 20 years ago. You were on there was a special committee for the MBTA.
Yep.
Talk about that, and how's that different 20 years later, if it's different at all?
Well, again, it's different a little bit. And one of the big things that we were able to do in 1999 and 2000 was one of the issues, one of the budget busters was MBTA. And what would happen is that the MBTA would go to the budget, whatever the deficit was, they'd send us the bill and say, okay, you have to make up the difference. Well, we didn't have necessarily a lot of control over it. It was one of the big impacts in our state budget, so we wanted to do what was called forward funding. And that's when we started to dedicate some of the sales tax to them to give them sort of a dedicated revenue stream. And we also did a lot of things with assessments. I'm sure Plymouth plays an assessment. You have direct train service. My town of North Reading was my hometown. Used to have an assessment that was about, let's say, $350,000 a year. It would be held off on their local aid cherry sheet distribution, but we received no service. We didn't have a train station. We couldn't get the ride. We couldn't get subway. We couldn't get bus. We were what's called a fringe community. So we were unserved, but we were assessed because we belonged sort of to the geographic region. At the same time, there were some towns that were getting brand new stations with direct service, no assessment at all. Well, think how you'd feel if you represented, a town that's saying, well, we're paying $350,000, and the only privilege we get is to get in our car and drive someplace else, whereas other towns may have a station that people could walk to, and they would pay no assessment. So we modified that. And the assessments we also capped the assessments, gave them dedicated revenue stream. So that was the first thing. The one problem that we really ran into that's kind of manifested itself with some of the issues today is that our assumptions about the sales tax and how rapidly revenues would go on the sales tax didn't come to pass. And because of that shortfall, it came in it was originally 60 to maybe now $100 million a year less than what our projections were. That means the MBTA over that period of time has had $60 to $100 million a year less than we thought they would have. That's part of some of the problems that they've, per year. So that's part of some of the problems that they've encountered. Was that some of our assumptions in 1999 didn't play out, and like anything, it's like revenue projections. They're good on Monday, but by the time Friday rolls around, you're constantly modifying. And that's the same thing as a member of the Board of Selectmen. You sit down with your financial planning team. We think this is what we're going to have for revenues for next year's budget. This is what we see for the expenditures from the various departments. And then you kind of go through this dynamic relationship of trying to reduce your spending levels. And what are the other assumptions we can build into on revenue? Maybe the state has certified free cash. Well, okay, maybe that'll help us solve our budget problem. Maybe we do a better look at what we take for what are called local receipts, building permits, things that are coming in, and maybe there's some numbers we can adjust there until you get to a point where they balance out. But that was one of the problems with the forward funding and the MBTA.
Yeah. So people, again, at home that watch this or in the general community, they always have a trouble understanding how government actually works. Can you explain the branch?
How much time do we have for the show? Holy cow.
We only have about 15 minutes, so. But briefly explain how the branches actually work.
Well, I mean, effectively, we served Massachusetts under the Massachusetts Constitution, which is sort of the blueprint for the federal Constitution. And it's actually, Massachusetts Constitution is older than the federal Constitution. So
a lot of people don't know that.
We have three supposedly co-equal branches of government. So my guess is the average person sitting at home thinks we have a governor of the Commonwealth and they're in charge of everything, that he's the top of the pyramid. But it's more, he's the top of one branch, the executive branch. We have the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch, and they're theoretically all three co-equal independent branches of government. And obviously we in the legislature pass the laws. The governor and the executive theoretically implement the laws, and the court basically referees the laws about interpretation, depending whether they're civil laws or administrative laws or this and that, or they're criminal laws. And that's effectively how it works. Now, obviously, there are different times where some are perceived to be more powerful or more independent, but effectively that's the way it's supposed to work.
And the governor, as we talked earlier, is very popular now.
Yes.
His approval rating is about 70%.
Yeah,
Why
basically.
is that, do you think?
I think.
Do you think it's because of the working relationship he has with the different branches?
I think it's because of the way he's addressed some of the big issues that have come up that he didn't even necessarily campaign on. So when you think about it, and I'm sure you'll have found this, issues that you were talking about last November when you were going out talking to the voters, some of those issues we may not even had a chance to work on. All of a sudden, it's January, and we're having like 5 years worth of snow in basically a half a winter. Well, nobody was campaigning on that. Nobody's talking about it. So I think the way he addressed that, the way he addressed the larger shortfall in the fiscal 15 deficit that he was left that turned out to be a bigger hole, the way that was addressed, the way he's addressed FY16, the way I think he conducts himself, and some of the little stories that, the story like, the phone's ringing in the governor's office and he answers it and helps out somebody.
Sure.
Those little stories are like, well, the phone was ringing, I answered it, why should that be so?
Right.
To the little things like, obviously you've been in the governor's office and it's very ornate and it's been redone and a lot of money was spent. And Governor Baker's like, I almost can't work in there because I'm too scared of spilling a cup of coffee or something like that. So he has that, ornate office to meet and greet people. The public frequently goes for tours through there, and he has a separate office where he can have papers and kind of keep it messy, and if he spills a cup of coffee, he doesn't feel like he's really damaged the State House. I think it's that personal thing.
Yeah, and he's been to Plymouth between the lieutenant governor and the governor in the first 6 months of 2015. They've been here, I think, a half dozen times. Right. And one of the times that the governor came, he came and met with the selectmen and department heads. And what struck a lot of people, including myself, is he took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, had a pad of paper and a pen, and was listening to everyone and making notes.
Yep. He always has his book. He's always making notes.
Yeah.
When we meet with him as the minority leader, I and the Senate minority leader,
which is almost weekly.
The Speaker, the President, Senate President, the respective Ways and Means chairs meet with he and the Lieutenant Governor on Mondays at 2. Taking a little sabbatical for August. And he's been very solicitous about, we're doing this, what is your input, seeking people's input. And I think that's helped him advance his agenda, and I think helped him. I also think part of it is that, for a lot of people in politics, the perception always is, well, what do you think is next for that person? What are they angling for? And knowing Governor Baker as well as I have, and for as long as I have, he's got the job he's always wanted.
Right.
He doesn't want to be United States Senator. He doesn't want to be president.
This is a job for him.
This is a job.
This is a job. It's not defining who he is. This is a job.
Right. This is the job that he's always wanted, that he's wanted to do, and it's a job he's always, and that's all he wants to do and be.
Yeah. So talk about how state government fits into local government and how it helps.
Well, I think probably the biggest one that most people are probably most aware of is what do we get for local aid? How much money does the state give to cities and towns so that they can provide the services that they need? But I mean, obviously, like, how many days kids need to be in school, the length of the school year. When student groups come to the State House, they say, well, what do you do? I said, well, for instance, one of the laws we have is maybe you don't have to go to a school 180 days. We might make it 200 days. And the parents sometimes raise their hands in celebration, and the kids kind of start cursing you. I said, but those are the kind of things, that we do. But, I mentioned earlier, you're on a Board of Selectmen or Finance Committee. The state certifies your free cash. So we're sometimes, they're taking a lot longer. We need to get that certified for a fall town meeting so that we can maybe spend that money to do things. The regulations that we put in place sometimes are good, sometimes require a lot more effort at the local level. One of the big ones we're debating, and probably be an issue this fall, is making some modification to our public records law. That was one of the issues we were going to debate
on that committee
in July before with Peter, Chairman Colcutton, isn't it?
Yep.
We were going to debate in July, and then there was a lot of issues raised by Mass Municipal Association and concerns by local officials that it would be a lot more work for them. and trying to work through and accommodate some of those requests and see if we can still make improvement in the public records law, but in a manner that isn't so onerous that it requires too much more on the part of municipalities. And so there's any myriad of ways that we impact. Obviously, there's any number of pieces of legislation that we've had. So if your town wants to build a new shopping plaza, and maybe it has a couple of restaurants, those restaurants want to be able to serve alcohol. Well, your town may need a couple more liquor licenses than so they're gonna.
Plymouth has plenty.
Plymouth has plenty, but
other towns that don't.
Other towns, I mean, they're gonna come and file something. Or, let's say Plymouth's building that new high school and determines that they need to have a little piece of land that's held by the Conservation Commission. Well, the local Conservation Commission can't just give that to the town. It has to come through the legislature, because under Article 97 of the Constitution, the land that's held like that needs to be transferred or conveyed over, because we want to preserve those natural resources of the Commonwealth. So you need to file a local bill for that. You want to change your charter in Plymouth, you need to file a local bill for that. So a lot of different interactions that we have. Some of them maybe need to be revisited so that you don't need a piece of legislation every time, but oftentimes you do.
I think one of the good things the governor did too was about regulations, as you were talking about, put a moratorium on regulations and really starting to look at regulations to try to create efficiencies.
Right, and sometimes Governor Patrick did some. I think Governor Bacon wants to take it a little bit further and find out other some that just
don't make sense.
Make sense, or were done at a time where they did make sense, and that's one of the biggest frustrations that I have, is that the way we did something in 1990 or 1994, when I was first elected, may have been the exact right way to do it in 1994, but with the advent of technology and the advent of different expectations, it doesn't mean it should be the same way we do it 20 years later. And we always need to be looking about how can we make those efficiencies or accommodations or modifications. But we also have to be about, one of the biggest problems is once you create something, getting rid of it, even if it ends up helping or being focused on a group that you weren't trying to help at a particular time, getting rid of it is almost impossible.
The two things you talked about that the legislature does is the budget, putting together a $38 billion budget, and laws and bills. Approximately how many bills are put forth every session?
It varies between the House and Senate. There's probably about between 5,000 and 6,000 bills right now. That was
amazing to me when I heard that,
And a lot of times what will happen is, you'll file a bill on an issue, and a colleague will file a bill on the same issue, slightly different. Maybe there's 10 of them, and they all get different bill numbers. They'll have a hearing. Well, then the committee gets together, has a hearing, says, hey, we like this idea, but we're going to redraft it. We're going to put them all together. We're going to make some tweaks, some modifications. Well, now all of a sudden it gets a new bill number. Then they send it out of the committee. Maybe it goes to the Committee on Ways and Means. Well, they redraft it, gets another new bill number. So sometimes, tracking the bill all the way through the process can be a little like water torture. It does take focus and attention. Technology has definitely helped that.
Absolutely, it's a good system.
A lot. So you could log in right now and say, okay, I want to know where my legislation is, and the public can too, going to the legislative website.
And the public, and that's another way connecting the public to government too, is that, and I've learned this quickly, and I've had a couple of people come forward to me about, some sort of regulation or some sort of things they don't think is right. I said, well, help me craft some language for a bill, and we'll write a bill and we'll see what happens.
Right. Yeah, we've had some what we call them by petition, by request pieces of legislation. I've had constituents contact me. I usually do set the standard about, could you put it in writing?
Absolutely, that's what I do too.
As opposed to somebody yelled at you over the gas pump at the gas station and said, this is really important to me, because I feel like if it's really important, then you'll take 2 minutes to write something out, email me, and kind of create a paper trail. Sometimes what you'll find out is that they're misinterpreting something that already exists. Somebody else has already filed a piece of legislation. Or quite frankly, sometimes they'll come up with an idea that you say, you know what, I like it so much, I'm not going to file it by request. I'm just going to file it.
Correct.
Because I think this is a good idea. Right. And we've gotten actually a couple of those done over the years past.
And how many bills, if there's 5,000 or 6,000 bills every session, how many usually get passed on average?
It varies. And one of the things that's interesting is that we have a 2-year session. So you get 5,000 or 6,000 bills, but all the legislation carries over. So you'll have the acts and resolves of 2015. So maybe we'll have 200 bills this year, but because bills carry over and take place, we'll have a lot more probably bills and resolves get done next year. So it can vary anywhere between 500 and 800, but a lot more bills get filed during the course of the year. So what you'll see is this fall, you'll go to town meeting, and if you have a fall town meeting in Plymouth, you'll go to town meeting in Plymouth, and I'll go to my town meetings in my 4 towns. And they may ask you to file legislation. We'll have a whole bunch of new bills come in, and they'll go through the process. So even though we start out with 5 or 6, we may end up the year with 8 or 9,000 different bill numbers.
Right. Yeah.
That we have to deal with.
And it takes time.
It does take time. And one of
It
the
may not happen in the first session.
no, it may not happen.
Three,
A lot of
good.
and sometimes it takes time to convince people and educate legislators,
A lot of education.
and now we're also going to be dealing with the petition request, people getting signatures to put things on the ballot for 2016. So it's tough to keep track of, and I would say this, that it's tough if people get the thing in the paper about how often we're in formal session. And usually it's like, well, you're only in formal session 3 hours and 10 minutes in the last month. What are you guys doing? Well, all those bills have hearings, committee hearings, meeting with constituents, meeting with advocacy groups for or against legislation, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah. You mentioned ballot questions coming up. One of it is about marijuana.
Yes.
And so I want to touch upon, I know we've got a couple minutes left, I want to touch upon one of the biggest issues I think that's happening in the state, and I think from the governor, yourself, and the other leaders, the drug epidemic. Talk about that and what's happening with that.
It is incredible. Obviously, it's an issue that people can no longer be in denial about. I think there was a time where there were certain communities that might say, well, that doesn't happen here. Well, the reality is it happens everywhere. And it's getting worse, and I think all of us, whether you're the most conservative Republican legislator or the most liberal Democratic legislator, need to set aside what our preconceived notions are and realize that we're burying far too many of our constituents of all ages, and that we need to think outside the box. And I think Governor Baker, along with the Attorney General, again, Republican and Democrat, put together a working group and came out with some recommendations, and has put some money recommendations behind it that I think have been pretty well received. We have the mayor up in the police chief up in Gloucester is basically saying, look, if you're willing to come in, turn your stuff in, I'm not going to charge you. He's had 100 people show up so far to say, look, you know what, we've come up with this Narcan where you can have somebody who's having an overdose and sort of bring them right back to life. But now that's become almost part of the drug paraphernalia. Like you're the designated Narcan person. You're absolutely right on that. And I think the state government's on the right track with it. I think local communities on the right track with it. Talking about it was the biggest thing, and having that discussion I think was really helpful. And I'm convinced that we'll get this turned around. It's not going to happen overnight. No, but I think one thing people can do is they need to ask questions when they're getting prescriptions. Do I need this much? When I get this, do I turn it in? Can I get it at my police station? So everybody has a role in this. Yeah, exactly. Well, I can't believe the time is up already. Brad, I want to thank you so much for coming. And don't forget, we have a 400th anniversary coming up. I've heard about that.
The first in the country will be happening in Plymouth.
Well, there's a reason for that. Absolutely.
Absolutely, in 2020. So we're doing a lot of work with that. So you'll be hearing more about that.
Absolutely.
And we hope you're going to be around and going to be a part
I hope
of that.
I hope we're around in 2020. Absolutely.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Again, I want to thank our minority leader, Brad Jones, for coming to Plymouth and being on our show. You're a true leader, and I want to thank you for what you do.
You do a great job for your community, and
thank you.
I look forward to serving with you for many years.
Yeah, me too. So thanks so much for all you do at home, and thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed our first show and found it informative. And until next time, be well, be safe, and see you next time on State Matters.